Thank you very much for the invitation to speak this afternoon. I'm obviously from electronic engineering, and so I feel very much the interloper here this afternoon, but I'm also similarly delighted to be part of this celebration. I've always been very much welcomed and felt at home in the Humanities Research Centre, so it's a great honour to be asked to speak this afternoon. And I'm here, I suppose, a little bit perhaps in the context of a project some of you will have heard of and some of you might not have heard of. It's XR Stories. So this is a big project delivered by the University of York in partnership with Screen Yorkshire and the British Film Institute. And my provocation is about the future of storytelling and the related concept of world building, because that's what XR Stories is all about. And this provocation has been prompted in some ways by an invitation I received last week, or well, some time ago, but to give a presentation last week and to introduce the film Ready Player One at the Science and Media Museum's Widescreen Weekend, which is a film by Steven Spielberg and a book by Ernest Cline. Hands up who's seen or read Ready Player One. Oh, okay, not too bad actually, but quite different from the audience last week, to be fair. I mean, I'm on home turf already with that kind of proportion of the audience who have seen it. That's good. So some more on that shortly. But first, I want to introduce XR Stories very, very briefly. So it's one of it's a program of 9 large projects dispersed across the UK. To enable collaborative research and development, not even with, but for the creative industries. And the Science and Media Museum are one of the partners on XR Stories, and that's perhaps one of the reasons why I was asked to go and introduce Ready Player One. But XR Stories, the project that's based in the heart of Yorkshire, is really about how research and industry come together to develop the next generation of digital storytelling, particularly taking advantage of all the challenges and opportunities that are introduced by immersive technology and interactive technology. And so, as you see here, VR headsets, they're a thing, although there was something in the news today about how Google and the BBC are trimming down some of their virtual reality programs. Gaming is clearly important as well. We've heard a lot about gaming from Sebastian earlier. We played a game in the last provocation, and also interactive storytelling, interactive television, an example of which was the Bandersnatch episode of Black Mirror that was broadcast around Christmas this year, or last year. But another reason perhaps why I've been sort of asked to, or was asked to talk about Ready Player One, introduce it, is because I have additional credentials in that I am part of the demographic the film was aimed at. So the film is chock full of pop culture references from the 1980s, and having grown up in a great part of the 1980s, they are also my pop culture references, and so some of that film speaks very much to me. Not all of it. Wasn't a huge gamer growing up, but a lot of the references to science fiction, adventure gaming, pop music was very much my thing. And of course, it's also about interactive storytelling. And although I wasn't much of a gamer, I didn't really do Dungeons and Dragons. The thing that really caught me in the 80s in a literary way was choose your own adventure. The way that you could interactively tell a story or work your own story through a book by turning to this page now or that page then. And also in particular, the Fighting Fantasy series. So I loved these. And I'd be found with one of these books, and I'd have my fingers intersplayed into all the pages to try and optimize my way through the story without sort of having to go back to the start. And of course, in terms of world building, these are a great example because Ian Livingstone, one of the authors of these books and the creators of these books, is a great world builder himself. So he's one of the founders of the Games Workshop, which is all about creating imaginary worlds in which you can play and have great battles with your friends. But also he was one of the founders of a particular big and important part of the UK games industry, and founded in part and supported the Tomb Raider series. So Ian Livingstone is a huge world builder, an important part of this kind of future of storytelling that I'm sort of provocating on today. And if we go back to Ready Player One, virtual reality is at the heart of this story. So the Oasis, capital letters, is a massive multiplayer online virtual reality game, a huge virtual universe of countless super detailed worlds satisfying all of humanity's whims and desires, where in addition, if you can code well enough, you can build your own world, you can establish your own rules and open it to the inhabitants of the Oasis to travel to explore and to interact with. And what starts off as a huge online game and lots of fun becomes so compelling and so preferable and so real that it becomes a way of life to humanity. In the book, our hero Wade, who you can see there in the VR headset, even goes to school in the Oasis. And in fact, by being at school in the Oasis, he gets a much better computer system to run his Oasis virtual reality world. And so that's one of the big benefits to him, apart from all the learning that he gets. And at the heart of the Oasis is the author, the creator, and the world builder, the genius coder, played absolutely brilliantly by Mark Rylance. Here you can, as some kind of weird combination of Steve Jobs from Apple and Garth from Wayne's World. And it's in the Oasis that his avatar takes the place, some Gandalfian character called Anorak. But ultimately, Halliday builds the Oasis for himself because, in his words, he never felt at home in the real world. It is therefore littered with the echoes of his own upbringing, 80s pop culture, science fiction, gaming, and strangely to a UK audience, perhaps Monty Python, a lot of it, in the book certainly. But even before the book and the film starts, he's died. So, and upon his death, he leaves behind a quest in the Oasis where there are 3 keys to be found, 3 gates to be opened, 3 games to be played and solved. And those games and those quests and those keys all come from his upbringing that he's littered into this 80s cultural reference within the Oasis. And ultimately, the winner wins the Oasis and the company that Halliday founded, and therefore the future of the world. So, some critics pose that Ready Player One, the book and the film, presents an interesting vision for what could be our virtual reality future. The dystopian awfulness of the real world is offset by the utopian bright lights and the possibilities and potentiality of the Oasis. You can be anyone or anything through your avatar. You are not limited, apart from how you play your game, the credits that you earn, and the bits of equipment that you can buy to improve your virtual life. A very positive vision for what VR might be. And of course, it is the story and concept of dystopian and utopian vision and world building draws on lots of other popular influences. And one that also is paralleled in some of the criticism around the film, and that I find very compelling, is, of course, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And this is my edition of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And so there are strong elements of this classic story. The poor, downtrodden background of, in this case, our hero, Charlie Bucket, the eccentric, reclusive, creative world builder of Willy Wonka, the quest for the golden ticket, of course, Wonka's Chocolate Factory, which is a bright, colourful, chocolate-filled oasis, not capital letters, away from the real world. And of course, into this world are introduced a series of larger-than-life characters, protagonists who serve to test the boundaries of this world and its rules, ultimately to determine which of them is the most worthy and pure of heart to inherit this kingdom of chocolate and carry on its good work for the good of the world. But what of the real world outside of the Oasis? It's not really discussed much in the film, but it is discussed quite a lot in the book. And it's a world set in 2045, which is pretty grim for most of the population. Wade lives in somewhere called the Stacks that you can see there on the right, and these are mobile homes stacked high outside most of the few metropolitan cities that still exist, pretty much because of all the issues of fuel, energy, food, space, climate crisis that happened in 2045. People pretty much drive to the nearest city and then stop when the fuel runs out and set up home wherever they are, and hence the stacks evolve. And so it's where the poor, which is most of the population, live. And so controlling your avatar, and so becoming someone or indeed anyone in the Oasis with all of its possibility, is the much preferred alternative living in the real world at the expense of ignoring the state of the real world and how we might start solving those problems. So it must be said that as a proud West Midlander, much to my horror and delight, Steven Spielberg's idea of this dystopian 2045 climate crisis infused future is Birmingham. So parts of Digbeth and the Jewellery Quarter in Birmingham are the scenes for much of the actual real world in the film. So do go and have a look at that, and you can even see in the background of some of the shots the new library, which obviously was seen to be appropriately sort of futuristic and would still exist in 2045. So, of course, no future-looking, VR-related dystopian cinematic vision of the future can overlook the impact of The Matrix, 20 years old this year. So this is the oasis to the nth degree. Humans demoted to nothing more than coma-induced batteries for our machine overlords. Data pipes jacked straight into our brains, feeding us virtual world that keeps us enslaved, entertained, and generating energy for our mechanical masters. And of course, one of the key moments in the first film, the classic film, is that where the character Cypher betrays his leather-coated colleagues in a deal made with the machines. And the payoff? To have his mind wiped, to forget the struggles of the grim, grey real world, and his body plugged back into the Matrix as a much preferable way of existing. So, as our VR technology starts to find a footing in the world, as smartphones already have in the 10 years that the Humanities Research Centre exists, perhaps what becomes our preferred platform for entertainment, maybe becomes our preferred platform for entertainment, what pill do we opt for? Do we go for the real, or do we go for the illusion? And that's certainly something that in XR Stories we're very concerned with. Our aim is to support the take-up of this technology for storytelling, and we need to think about how that's done. Which world do we prefer? What kind of worlds are we building? Are they worlds that we want to be part of? And is there room for the real world within them? Very, very important part as we think about the next chapter of our human journey. And I couldn't pass up this provocation without bringing this right up to date. So does anybody know what that is? No, Sebastian? Fortnite. It is indeed Fortnite. So a cataclysmic, monumental moment took place at the weekend. 6 million people watched the world end and started staring at this black hole on their screens, wondering what happens next. For those who don't know what Fortnite is, and I am not one of those people, it's a huge online game played by 250 million people the world over. There is no clear narrative, and yet it's delivered as seasons, and now it's started to be told in chapters, which of course are the devices that belong to television drama and literary and books, of course, literature and books. And as Chapter 1 seasons developed, seeds of uncertainty and possibility were sown throughout the virtual world. We're hinting at something was going to happen, something's big, we're not sure what it is, but it was down to the players to create their own narrative as to what might be going on and what might this be about and what does our future hold. And they did that, of course, through the currency of online communication and social media challenges. And something was indeed happening and something was indeed planned, but no one quite knew what, until eventually the whole world and all the characters in it, including your character if you were playing it on Sunday evening, were sucked into this big black hole, and the whole thing disappeared. And everyone's just left there staring, kind of going, what's going on? And so that compelled and caught people's imagination, and that fortnight was dead. Until, of course, 2 days later, the next chapter started. The whole thing was rebooted in a slightly different way, and the game begins again. So perhaps the oasis is already here, and in which case, are we ready for it? Thank you very much.
One of the things that a humanities education, I guess, often touts is its ability to be critical. But immersion tries to reduce the distance between what you see and what you experience. So how do you reconcile those two counter forces in the work that you're thinking about?
Well, that's a very interesting and challenging question, David. So let me see. I guess I've been asked about this before. How do we define an immersive entertainment? And my maybe throwaway sort of answer, although I do believe in it, is that we can very easily become immersed in a book, and there's nothing in terms of modern technology about that nature of how we engage with the text. There are other definitions of immersion that are maybe more psychologically or philosophically or in terms of human interaction are defined and tested in various ways. And I guess XR Stories is fundamentally about bringing together researchers in arts and humanities and science and engineering, the technology coming from one direction, but the storytelling art and the criticism and the testing of the ideas in terms of the aesthetics and the stories that we're producing, very much coming from the arts and humanities. And I will defer to my esteemed colleague, Professor Higson, in this, who one of the partners on this project, and in all the work that we did in building it. And Marion will remember this as well. And we'd sit around the table dealing with the latest challenges that AHRC had sent us that week. Andrew would say, "Why am I here?" And of course, it's because he can ask those questions very, very well, and criticise and comment and add the insight to the more technological focus that maybe Marion and I brought to the project, that ultimately is why XR Stories is important, because it's the bringing together of those two disciplines.
I can ask a question. I already have the microphone. So can you say something more about social responsibility? So as I understand it, kind of a large part of what you're doing and what other people over in TFTI are doing is to make these experiences more enjoyable, make the games better to play. And they're kind of tapping into human psychology in order to make these kind of, in a way, kind of more addictive. I mean, addictive might be the wrong word there, but kind of compelling, yeah. So how do you square that with the thought that, I mean, kind of in these dystopian situations, the alternative reality really is something that we want to be part of?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that there was another news item either this week or last week about addiction in gaming for young people, and it's a very important part of it. And Lord knows we're all addicted to our phones in a way that kind of is kind of a little bit scary to think about where we were 10 years ago in that respect. And I think that's something, again, we have to be very much aware of. And again, it's important that scholars are asking the right questions about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And let's not, the game makers are exceedingly clever at what they do, and I think that's because they're multidisciplinary, engineers, creatives, writers. They understand, human psychology and how to make those games that addictive. There's a great bit in Ready Player One, if I refer back to the subject of my talk. It is about consuming and building up coins, because without coins you can't do anything in the world. And again, Wade, our character, is quite poor, even in the real world, or even in the virtual world. He doesn't have much. Most of what he gets from his school life, actually, whether that's real or virtual. And he doesn't have many credits to go touring around this giant universe of possibility, and he's restricted to his own backyard, effectively, and his friends that he makes in the virtual world. But he finds the first clue to the that sets him on the hunt for the Easter egg in his backyard in the school, effectively, and it's something that he can do. So I guess, and so it's that collecting of coins is, and building up wealth is very kind of addictive in all sorts of walks of life, virtual and real, I guess. So yeah, it's a very important, and I'd say that one of the really important things that we're trying to do at the University of York is to try and engage with the social scientist researchers. And it's not just creating a world or having technology to drive that creation. We have to do it responsibly and ethically, and to understand the implications of what we do. And that's why the great multidisciplinary work we do here at the University of York, champion hat on, is why I think we're good at it, and will help to set the scene for the future.